Under the European Medical Device Regulation, Article 61.10 offers manufacturers a highly specific pathway to navigate past the requirement for human clinical trials. By relying entirely on non-clinical data, manufacturers can validate a device's safety and performance without placing a single product in a human subject. Yet, notified bodies reject these justifications on a daily basis. Many manufacturers attempt the pathway, only to find their submissions disqualified due to a lack of technical depth. This layout details the 4 absolute prerequisites required to even attempt this exemption: a precisely defined intended purpose, a state-of-the-art analysis, a robust body of non-clinical data, and a comprehensive risk file. Reviewers do not grade these sections in isolation. They evaluate the submission holistically, searching for a seamless, interconnected web of logic where the device claims, the identified risks, and the technical evidence perfectly align. Mastering this alignment is the only way to proceed. If any piece of the technical documentation implies a need for human testing, the exemption is voided, resulting in the high costs and delays of unexpected clinical trials. Step 1 begins with the state-of-the-art analysis. This document serves as the absolute baseline, dictating exactly which safety and performance parameters must be measured to prove the device works. The limitation is straightforward. If the accepted industry standard proves that similar devices rely on human clinical outcomes to verify their safety, the 61.10 exemption is legally invalid for your device. Notified bodies consistently identify the same deficiency. Manufacturers often fail to define measurable, device-specific parameters within this analysis, preventing a valid comparison between their bench tests and the industry standard. This scale shows how reviewers evaluate your data. They weigh your non-clinical evidence directly against the established clinical outcomes of the industry standard to determine if bench testing can adequately replace human data. A poorly constructed state-of-the-art analysis guarantees failure before the reviewer even opens the rest of the technical file. Once the baseline is set, you must audit the intended purpose for clinical claims. The rule is absolute. Any explicit promise of a clinical outcome mandates the use of human data. You also have to account for implicit claims. Sometimes simply belonging to a generic device group forces a clinical claim onto the product, even if it is not explicitly stated in your documentation. This decision tree illustrates the requirement. An implicit claim, like a TENS unit creating electric pulses for pain control, creates a pathway to mandatory clinical data. Conversely, acceptable non-clinical scenarios include simple surgical instruments that facilitate procedural success without directly impacting patient health outcomes. Next, you must map the exact device-patient interactions. Reviewers prioritize physical evidence like the level of invasiveness, duration of contact, and specific tissue type. Devices intended for direct contact with the central nervous system or the circulatory system are excluded from Article 61.1 entirely. For software and AI devices, interaction extends beyond physical contact, influencing a patient's cognitive processes or triggering an immediate treatment decision by a clinician is categorized as a high-risk interaction. The risk management file must align directly with these mapped interactions. You have to isolate the worst-case clinical risks associated with the specific anatomy your device touches. The core test is extrapolation. You must prove that the data generated in bench testing or simulated use reliably confirms there will be no negative impact on a living human. If the device relies on biological responses that cannot be fully predicted in a lab, clinical testing is required. Proving highly predictable biological responses is what allows for a successful exemption. With the evidence gathered, you synthesize the non-clinical data into the clinical evaluation report. This section must conclusively prove conformity to General Safety and Performance Requirements 1 and 8. This comparison shows how notified bodies evaluate these documents. The deficient submission on the left simply reiterates the legal text of the MDR. The detailed matrix on the right references specific bench test IDs mapped directly to the required state-of-the-art parameters. Do not attempt to bypass clinical requirements by claiming the device has no clinical benefit. Every medical device must prove at least an indirect benefit, such as facilitating a surgical procedure, to pass the mandatory benefit-risk analysis. There is also a significant regulatory consequence to providing mixed data. Including a small amount of low-quality clinical data, like old complaint logs or vigilance reports, can legally invalidate the non-clinical exemption pathway. This post-market workflow highlights a common contradiction in data collection strategies. Planning general post-market activities, like literature searches, is required. However, scheduling specific activities, like user surveys or trials, indicates that human data is actually necessary to confirm safety. Even a flawlessly tested device will be rejected if the technical documentation accidentally implies a future need for human clinical data. Before submission, verify 5 criteria. Parameters are non-clinically testable, 0 clinical claims, predictable biological responses. Risks mitigated via bench tests, no specific post-market trials. Once these conditions are met, the submission is verified. A successful 61.10 justification depends on engineering undeniable, logical proof of safety from the ground up.